Have you been wondering when I was going to release part 3 of the Mike Paletta LED lighting experiment video series? If so, you're not alone. I've literally received thousands of inquiries from viewers with that exact same question. And I'm here to tell you, 8 months later, today is your lucky day. We're going to be talking with Mike Paletta and special guest Sanjay Joshi regarding that particular tank, as well as their results and maybe some general thoughts and opinions on LED lighting. I'm Russ Kikel, and welcome to another episode of American Reef. So welcome again. We're here with Mike Paletta. Again.
Good to see you again.
Even though we've been here for probably, 30 to 45 minutes taking pictures and all that fun stuff, right? Let's talk 7 months-ish, right?
7 months, plus or minus. Only one major setback. About 3 months ago now, had a major water damage, and whenever they had to repair the tank, $30,000 worth of water damage when they had to repair the tank, paint and everything. Corals didn't seem to like a lot of the stuff that they sprayed, so I lost some animals. Right. But overall, the tank is close to where I want, but it's not perfect. As I said, when we started, this was an LED experiment, and I've had to bump it up a little bit as I put a Reef Bright unit in because I really wanted the corals to pop, and the AIs just didn't make the corals pop to the same extent that the Reef Brights did. So I added that. I also added some red and green LEDs to bring out the colors of the fish a little bit more. So overall, I'm somewhat satisfied with the LEDs, but I'm not ecstatic about them.
Right.
So I'm very seriously considering switching out the AI LEDs and going back to T5s, but keeping the Reef Brights in to keep the pop instead of the actinics. So with the T5s and the LEDs, I think I'll get even better color.
Right. So let's take a second. First of all, back up. The $30,000 worth of damage was not related to a leak in the tank.
No, this was the 2 days after Thanksgiving. I had the entire house decorated for Christmas. I come downstairs, and it's like Home Alone where they had the water bandits. Right. You step down, and there's an inch of water on the floor, and immediately my first thought is the fish tank broke.
Damn,
because I've been accustomed to water damage from fish tanks, but then I'm soon realizing that there's not enough water in the 75 to flood the entire house. Right. So about 1,200 gallons of water leaked out over 6 hours, which flooded this floor, flooded the entire downstairs, did some damage to the tank downstairs, the whole fish room, the whole garage. Everything basically had to be torn out and replaced, which took 2 months.
Right. And to me, though, the reason why this is important, though, is because everybody, they'll do work around their house, and they don't realize how, if it's airborne, it can also affect the tank. So tell me how that kind of affected the tank.
Well, the spray that they used is something they used to have to go in hazmat suits because they don't want black mold. Because you think that you have the water out of the house a couple days afterwards, but then you suddenly get this blooming smell that you can't get out of your mind, and that's whenever they came in and demolished all the floors, ceilings, and everything, took everything out and started spraying. And once they started spraying, it brought the pH of the water down in this tank and the tank downstairs dramatically, down to like 7.5, 7.6 instead of the usual 8.1, 8.2. Needless to say, a lot of the corals don't like suddenly be shocked by a low pH. And even though I was dumping buffer in as fast as I could, just didn't have the effect. I had to do massive water changes, carbon.
Right.
It took roughly 6 weeks for it to get back stable.
Right.
I mean, which amazed me how long it took, but once a tank crashes like that, I mean, I kept losing corals, got very frustrated, didn't add anything for a month, then finally it stabilized, and now I can put stuff and it does fine again.
And now, that drop, right, from 8.1, 8.2 to 7.5, 7.6, over what period of time, right?
That was like an hour after they sprayed and painted.
Right.
I mean, it was very fast. But the other thing that it shows, and this is something that everyone should remember, it was for an $8 part that I had $30,000 worth of damage, and I was going to replace the part the next day.
Right.
So as with every tank, one of the things I try to tell people is if there's something small that you think you should do, do it. Don't wait till the next day, because that could cause major problems. This is the ultimate. Right. So now when I see something fell over, it looks like it's falling over, I don't hesitate. I immediately move it. I did that before, but now I'm even more meticulous in looking at this.
Right.
Now, as I was saying, overall the tank has done fairly well. I mean, with the mishaps, but there are some shortcomings and some positives. One, this has become a lot more exotic fish tank than downstairs. One of the reasons is this is in my kitchen, so every morning when I'm sitting eating breakfast, I can look at the really unique fish in there, because right now you could hopefully see the peppermint hogfish. It's a true Opercularis hogfish. There aren't a whole lot of those in the U.S., and it took me 6 months to get it.
That's what I was going to say. Let's go back to how long it took, right?
It took 6 months of me begging, and fortunately we have Wet Pets in Pittsburgh, and he got me a lot of these exotic fish. He got me the Opercularis, he got me the early eyes wrasse, he got me the rhomboidalis, the Hawaiian flame. Downstairs he got me the Moorish idol and the Red Sea Regal. But I mean, a lot of places, or some places, can get you some of these exotic fish. The nice thing about Wet Pets is they really work hard to acclimate the fish and make sure the fish are eating. Big Ed, who's the father of Brian, Eddie, and Dean, works about 3 to 4 hours a day acclimating the fish at Wet Pets. That is, he doesn't just throw the food in and walk away. He makes sure that the fish like the Moorish idols, the Regal angels, the stuff that are really hard to get to eat, or get to feed, start to eat. I mean, he starts them off with blackworms, live blackworms, then he goes to frozen, then he does live brine, then he moves on to mysis, then he goes on to pellets. So it may take 3 or 4 weeks. Like the Moorish idol I have downstairs, he had for a month. He wouldn't even sell it to me until he got it to eat. So it's been in my tank now almost 2 months, and because of how well he did acclimating, it had no problem when I put it in. The other aspect with this tank is, because it's so small, if I have any new fish that I'm adding, I do acclimate them in an acclimation box. That is, there's a clear plastic box that sits in here. I get the fish accustomed to one another, I get them accustomed to eating the food, and by doing that I've been able to reduce the mortalities from about 40% down to less than 5%. So fortunately I lose very few fish when I'm adding them to this tank.
So when you have $700 fish, it's a good idea to do that.
Yeah. I mean, the Bodianus hogfish ate immediately. I mean, it was well acclimated, like I said there, and it's been the star of the tank. I mean, it usually sits out in the front, as you can see it there. So, I mean, and beside it is an early eye wrasse, so there's some really cool fish in here. The other nice thing about this tank is the soft corals have done phenomenally well. Some of the LPS have done well, but the problem that I've had most difficulty with have been with acans. That is, under the LEDs, for whatever reason, the red acans all turn orange, and after 3, 4, 6 months, they literally start to peel from their tissue from the calcareous skeleton. And that's a real problem, and I've seen that in a couple of tanks. And a little bit Sanjay will be here, and he'll talk to you that he's had the same experience that I've had.
We all have, right.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking of switching over back from the LEDs. I will keep the LEDs, the Reef Brights, but I'll get rid of the AIs, simply because I'm not seeing the kind of success that I want with the ACANs and other stuff. Downstairs, I'm not having quite as big a problem as I am in this tank.
And again, downstairs you have the metal halides.
I have the metal halides and the Reef Bright LEDs.
Right.
And the metal halides are still the standard for me.
Right.
I mean, that's where all my acros are. And I've still tried to put acros and montiparas up here. They last about a month, and I've put them high, low, and intermediate. They all died about the same time. So I don't know what the cause is. The tank's been up for 7 months. Everything else, I mean, tough to keep stuff like xenia, which used to be tough to keep, which is now like a weed, and other stuff has all done exceptionally well. Those corals, on the other hand, just don't do well, for whatever reason.
And okay, so now talk about the good stuff. What have you really liked about it so far?
I like how the zoanthids do in here. I like the fish have their true colors in here. They don't tend to fade like sometimes they do under metal halides, but also I think that's part of the diet that I'm feeding them. I've added, and the nice thing about this tank is I feed it a small amount 8 to 10 times a day. That is, every time I take Lucy out or every time I get up, because it's right here, I pop a little bit of food instead of that one big feeding. So the phosphate and nitrate levels are undetectable, even though I'm not running a lot of remover.
Right.
The Ling ecosystem filter takes a lot out. I just took out roughly 1.5 pounds dry weight of algae, which is an exceptional large amount. I mean, it was basically covering it. I put some back downstairs because that was the other thing that happened when the pH dropped. The algae all died off in the ecosystem filter. But so I know it's taking out a lot of the nitrate and the phosphate. So between that and the constant, frequent, small feedings, it's a lot easier to maintain this tank.
And now what do you feed them? Same as before, remember you had that mixed kind of diet?
I still have a very mixed diet. I feed them Thera A for the garlic to make sure, because there's a lot of wrasses, I don't want any worms in their guts. I also feed them mysis, 2 kinds. I feed them Piscine Energetics frozen mysis and Hikari mysis. The Hikari mysis is a little bit smaller, so some of these smallmouth fish do that. I feed them Cyclopes. I feed them Rogers Reef food, and I feed them, there's one other thing. So they get a variety like every day.
But again,
it gets mixed in.
Many small?
Many small, because I mean, there's now automatic feeders on the market, which I looked at that, and it's about a $900 unit. I can't really justify $900 to feed the fish constantly. You can make it for about $300. So that's one of the next things I'm thinking of adding to this tank is a constant automatic feeder, because these guys, if you took close-up pictures, you saw how fat all the fish are in here. And with low nitrogen or low weight levels, low phosphate nitrate levels, and that fat of fish, that's the perfect situation for these tanks.
Right. So, LED experiment, when you look at it so far, you like the way, in general, the tank is going as far as the fish, the exotic?
I'd give it, the way the fish are, I'd give it like a B+.
Okay. Make it an A.
Being able to keep all the egg cans and everything else without them losing their tissue and everything else, and changing colors to unattractive orange from a really nice deep red color, which has happened in 3 or 4 of these corals in here so far.
And you've seen it more with egg cans. What about the other kind of LPS corals? Anything else you see?
The blastomusas have pretty much stayed the same. The blastos do real well in here. The acans do not for some reason. And they've been fed. The scolies also don't do well, but the scolies, from talking with other people, we're all having difficulty keeping them long term. So I don't even get them anymore. Even though I fed them every other day, thought that was the secret, that didn't make any difference. So I've gone away from even trying to keep the scolies long term.
And let's define long term. Over a year, under a year?
Anything over a year is not really long term. I consider stuff 5 years. I mean, I have some corals downstairs that are 15 years old. That's my long term goal. But these, if I can keep them for a year and they don't retract and they start to show growth, that's what I consider successful. And right now, I don't consider myself successful with many of the acans in here.
Right.
I mean, that's why I bought, along the bottom are a lot of little tiny ones that I paid $5 for, just to see what would happen with them. And they're out and they open for the first month or two. They're getting fed, and then over time they just start to retract.
Right.
And it's very disappointing. The same thing, I've put a ton of euphyllias in here. They all disappeared. They all retracted. Didn't have brown jelly. So now I'm going 3 months without any of them in here. I'm going to try and put another one in another month or two, see if it's successful, since there's nothing in there for it to eat right now.
And these are, again, did you take the frags out of the big tank downstairs that you knew were doing well?
Yeah.
Right, so again, you know they're doing well there. There's something going on there.
There's something going on.
And then as far as the lighting goes, I remember having a conversation with you where you were testing the light as far as PAR and everything else, so you know that that's right, correct?
Yeah. I don't know if it's too focused on one spot, so you're getting the hot spots, which is problematic, and it's just sort of being like a magnifying glass on that one spot on the acans, or what the difficulty is. I'm just not overall satisfied with.
Right.
I like the look. The tank looks very good in my eyes. At night it really glows. You can't really see it now because of the sunlight in the back. It's kind of washed out. But at night the tank really glows, which is what I enjoy about it. And the fish really look healthy and nice. But I'm just not overall have that level of satisfaction I do with the tank downstairs.
Right.
I'm very lucky. Sanjay came by to visit today. He hadn't seen the new tanks.
Yeah.
So, for those of you that don't know, Sanjay is the guru of lighting in all of Aquaria. He's also my twin brother, because whenever we're out, people confuse us constantly. You can see that. People think we're kidding, but seriously, apparently all bald-headed men look exactly alike to most people. So Sanjay and I constantly get confused for one another. So
that's because we're so smart.
Yes, and being 8 inches taller than Sanjay has not helped me differentiate between us.
That's right.
So one of the things that we have been discussing is we both have not seen long-term success with the LEDs with some of the LPSs, and Sanjay's not seen it and I've not seen it. It may not be that they're getting enough light, or the light is too focused away or too focused on. We don't know what it is, but that's one of the aspects we're trying to experiment with or try to find out what the problem is. Because the next thing, if I switch back over to T5s, obviously I'm not going to throw these out and see if that changes my success rate with them. Because the water is the same quality as downstairs. There's virtually no nitrate or phosphate. Alkalinity is fine, calcium's fine, magnesium's fine. So there's two factors that it may be. It may be lighting or it may be nutritional. Now we're feeding them, Sanjay's doing the same thing I am, we're feeding them a lot of different things, but for the most part we don't have long-term success with them. And we don't really understand why. And when you look back on our success with a lot of these corals and a lot of fish that we couldn't keep before, like Anthias, a lot of it was nutritional.
Right.
So that may be our shortcoming, is we haven't figured out what they actually need to keep them going long term. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the same kind of things that you're seeing here, and you have this coral just peeling off the base.
Right.
And what is it that's causing it to do that? You know, it's not water parameters. There are things that are doing really well in here. But somehow the corals just don't seem to be doing well.
Yeah, we used to see that phenomenon with Euphyllia corals. When you had high phosphate, the Euphyllias would just pull off the skeleton. But here the phosphate's undetectable, so that's not it. And I have fed that coral at least 3 times a week with different foods, and it does eat.
Right.
So even though it's eating, it's still pulled away from the tissue. So, I mean, the tissue looks healthy, except it's pulled away from the skeleton.
We've seen that with the old elegance corals when they used to just leave their skeleton
Yeah.
and float away. And then people speculated it was strontium. Maybe it's something similar along those lines with some of these corals too.
Well, I am adding strontium and iodine to this tank because I went back to the old school, what I used to do with the 500 in my old house. I've gone back to everything I used to do. I've quit fooling around with a lot of the nonsense, and I've gone back to adding strontium.
Dosing zeolite.
Back to adding iodine. No, we're not even going there.
There you go.
No, I've gone back to adding iodine, back to adding strontium, feeding the tank small amounts often, which is what I used to do, and putting ozone on it. So I've gone back to the old parameters that I used to do. And for any of you that saw my old 500-gallon tank, my 1,200-gallon tank was nice, but the 500-gallon tank was a tank I should have never broken down because the corals were all grown from fragments and they were all as...
That was your best tank.
That was the best tank by far. And that was the tank I did the least amount of stuff on. I wasn't fooling around, I wasn't changing, I wasn't experimenting, I just did the same things. Adding iodine and strontium, feeding small amounts regularly, had gorgeous fish in there, had the Red Sea Regal and stuff like that in there.
Right.
And the tank, I mean, the corals just literally grew out of the water.
Right.
Versus here and downstairs, trying to finagle with a lot of different things, I haven't had the same level of success. So now I'm going back to basics again.
Right.
As simple as I can, not doing a lot of the crazy stuff that I've been experimenting with, and just seeing if I can get the same kind of growth.
How long have you had these clams in this lake?
They've been in here since the beginning.
Which is?
7 months.
So that's a good question. As far as to me, if I'm somebody listening to this, right, I'm thinking number one, are all LEDs number one and all corals, right? Because you said LPS. How about SPS? Because you hear all kind of.
Like I said, the SPS have not done well in this tank for whatever reason, but the clams have done well. All the soft corals have done phenomenally well. The zoes have done well. What else has done well? The mushrooms have done well.
Right.
So a lot of corals have done really well in here, but some corals have not. But that also may be part of the problem is we try to keep everything together.
That's the mixed reef issue, right?
So are some corals better under these than others, and we should stick with that.
Yeah, I think there might be something to that you can't really mix a lot of these things together.
Right.
Especially with a lot of these things put out stingers.
Right.
Which you don't see in the day. I don't know what at night, how far these stingers are extending or what toxic chemicals they're putting out.
Right.
Yeah, because the chalices have extensive stingers, and they kill pretty much anything around them.
Right.
And so do the favias. The favias are one of the nastier LPSs just for cleaning everything around them. So if you don't come down at 2 o'clock in the morning with a flashlight and look and see what's going on, and you can't figure out why that coral died. I mean, I've lost corals that I could never figure out why. Come down at night and say, oh, there's stingers from... I remember the first time I had a Galaxia coral and it was killing stuff 6 inches away from it. You see this little tiny coral, you don't think it's going to cause any problems?
Bam.
But I mean, its stingers were so nasty.
The hydrophores used to be really nasty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looked like space alien has taken over a coral. And for years they'd be fine together close to each other.
Right.
And then one day, boom, there'd be all this huge mesenterial whatever you call
Yeah, the
it.
mesenteric filaments. Basically, it looks like it's putting its guts out and consuming it. And the next day you have this white skeleton. You're going, oh, it bleached overnight. Now I don't know what happened. Well, what happened was it killed it.
Yeah, there's always.
Yeah, and there's also the toxicities produced by some of the soft corals.
We don't really know what's going on with them.
Yeah, I mean, some soft corals produce a lot, and as a result, I mean, terpenoids and sarcophenoids are very nasty to some of these LPSs and some of the stony corals, so you can't really keep them in there.
Right.
I mean, obviously, that's why I always get bigger and bigger tanks so I can try to mix stuff, but in a small 75-gallon tank, I mean, no, I mean, I started off with, my first saltwater tank was a 55, and then after I got married, I had a 120-gallon tank sitting on my grandmother's porch. As I got married, I said, this will be the biggest tank I'll ever need, honey.
Yeah.
2 years later, it was a 240. 3 years after that, it was a 540. And 6 or 7 years after that, it was a 1200. And she said, yeah, this is the last tank. And unfortunately, it was the last tank. So now I've gone back to a 375. So these are both much more manageable tanks than the 1200. The 1200 was a great tank, but when you have to use a trapeze to get into work with stuff and knock out walls to get behind it. Yeah, it's now in Chicago. It's now been up in Chicago for a year. We moved it, hauled it to Chicago.
That's right.
I mean, and he's running these lights on it, but he's running, I think he has 36 of them on top of that tank.
Okay.
Why do you have these green ones in here?
Just to try and add a little bit of color, just to see if it made any difference.
And did it?
Not really. It's just, you know me, Sanjay. I'm always experimenting and playing with stuff just to see. I had those. Let's see if it makes any
I
difference.
think you should get the Vega ones and try those. They are full spectrum. They have red light in them. They have a much wider range of blues. And maybe with a more full spectrum light, you might have more success.
Yeah.
You know, one of the guys was telling me the issue with LEDs that he thinks is, number one, you can get good lighting out of them, but the problem is you can also change the adjustment so you wipe out the good lighting. Right? In other words, the fact that you can change the percentage of blues, reds, whites, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it gives you the flexibility of adjusting it to what you like.
Right, so you have enough rope to choke yourself.
You hope that
What you like is what's conducive for the corals growing.
right. You gotta get a match of both of those.
Right.
Yeah, it's not hard to do. You know, with most people, always are. The problem right now, I think, is when you see these corals glowing like this, and you buy them like that, and if they don't look the same in your tank, then you pretty much wasted your money.
Right.
Well,
So people will go out of their way now to try and make them look like that, and try to get this bluest light possible to make them look like that. But I'm not sure if that's the best light for the corals to grow in.
Right. Right.
But that gets to the point. Is the process to grow them as fast as you can or to enjoy them as a hobby?
long as they live.
There's a fine line.
As they live.
Yeah, as long as they live. That's the
3 months.
Yeah.
That's good enough. As they look good.
Yeah.
They look good dying.
Yeah. It was beautiful, but then it died overnight. Yeah.
So it's got to look good while it's dying.
Yeah.
If that's the objective, yeah, sure. You know, I'd buy that.
Obviously, that's not what we want, but no, Sanjay. It's funny thing is Sanjay keeps corals better than anyone. I mean, his tanks were literally full rocks of corals. You had to go with a chisel to take things out. So now Sanjay's saying they're good as they're dying. Sanjay doesn't kill that many corals. I mean, he grows them until they're as big as a table, and then he has to chisel them out and gives them the Joe Iolo. So I mean, there's pluses and minuses.
I look at things differently, so.
Right.
Well, I have always been told that I had no patience as a human being, but now that I grow live corals, I have patience because I know it might take 2 years to see something from these little tiny fragments I've grown. So I have developed more patience, at least for corals. For most people, probably not so much.
Right. And so, okay, so as far as the LEDs, where are you taking it? I mean, where do you
Probably, I will either go to T5s or I'll go to a more full spectrum unit to see if that will enhance the long-term success of these corals.
Right.
I mean, if that doesn't do it, then the next step is to go to T5s, and if the T5s don't work, basically stick some of them downstairs, stick some of them here, see if the metal halides make a difference. If none of that does, then it gets back to it's a nutritional problem or it's a water quality problem. But I mean, that's one of the things that a lot of people still tend to neglect, and which amazes me, is they don't do the testing to see what their water quality is.
Right.
They look at the tank and go, oh, it's clear, it looks good, but vodka's clear, but the corals wouldn't really do too well in it. So,
Right.
I mean, I do regular every Saturday morning. I test all the parameters on both tanks, and I make the adjustments accordingly over the weekend. I don't do anything really fast anymore.
Right.
There have been a number of people that have taken care of their tanks. They saw a problem, and he did something really fast and wiped out the whole tank. I'm not going to name any names, but some of these people had incredible tanks, and as I said at the beginning, when you see something small, do it and fix it. Don't wait and then have to do this major thing all at once, because that's the worst thing you can do in these kind of tanks, particularly smaller tanks, 75 or smaller. In the 300, you can do a lot of damage, but it's a little bit more difficult to really wipe it out.
Right.
But here, you can wipe this out in a blink of an eye.
Right.
And I've done that. Now, I mean, whenever I had a 40 here before, the calcium level dropped, so I said, okay, I'm going to add some Kalkwasser, and I wasn't paying attention, and it poured the whole gallon bucket of Kalkwasser into the tank, basically bleached 3/4 of the tank out for a 15-minute stupid decision.
Right.
So those are things to look at. I mean, I'd love to tell you I've never lost a coral, but I would be lying. I mean, I've lost a number, and part of it is because I'm experimenting, and two, because I don't listen to my own advice. I do things fast. I want things to happen. So it's the
Advice
truth.
is for other people, man.
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do.
There you go. Okay, so if you're going to switch these lights out, again, the lessons to be learned would be, how are you going to do that? Like Sanjay said, maybe try the Vega or a full spectrum light. Give an approach of your advice on how you would do that.
What I would do is I would switch these out to a full spectrum, start them off at about the same levels that I'm at now, so you don't light shock everything, then gradually ramp everything up to get more of the full spectrum and more of the intensity, and see if that makes a difference.
Okay, so back up for a second. We say starting them out as you have these ones.
I have par meters, so I can check and see what the par levels are. So make sure I have comparable par levels, so that I'm, as I said, not shocking the tank.
And would you do the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good strategy, at least to go with full spectrum ones. There's at least 2 good ones out there right now. You can get the Ecotech, the Radions are pretty good, and then you have the Vegas. So you have both of those.
I'm laughing because I'm not a fan of the Ecotech, with a fan underneath sucking the salt water up there.
Well, I mean, I've been running Ecotech for more than a year now, and so about a month ago, I took it apart to see what damage the salt has caused in there. I was very, very surprised at how little the damage was. There was hardly any.
Yeah, see, in my case, I probably had it a little bit too close, right?
Yeah.
So when I pulled it apart, I'm like, oh man, what a bad design. So it's not bad, it's more rust.
The fans have gotten a lot better too.
Yeah.
So you have to realize that the new fans are pretty much sealed. So nothing really goes into the fan, and they've done a good job with some of the parts.
Also, if you have splashing fish, like downstairs, those metal halides are 18 inches above the water, I still have to clean those every 2 weeks, the glass on top of the metal halides, because the fish splash so much. I lose 30 to 40% of the light if I don't clean them regularly. So the same thing I would assume would happen with these.
So again, full spectrum, the ones you like, Ecotech, and then the Vega?
Yeah, I think those are the 2 that are top of the market right now.
Yeah, they offer the flexibility, they offer the full spectrum.
Yeah, you have the full spectrum, you have the capability of adjusting it to your liking. If you don't like the greens, then you can dim those down.
Sure.
You don't like the red, dim that down.
Exactly. Again, enough rope to choke yourself.
Yeah.
You could.
But if you know what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and now that I have a baseline to see what does well and what doesn't, I mean, as I said, this is an experimental tank, but it's also a fish tank more than the downstairs tank, because I have fish that I really like in this tank. So, and I don't have as expensive a stuff as I have down there. I have some chalices, but for the most part, it's a lot of soft and Zoes that aren't quite ridiculously priced like downstairs. So I can see how well stuff does here as a switch over and say, this did better, this did worse. So now that there's a baseline, I mean, that's, I mean, coming from a research background, now that I have a standard, I can see if it makes a difference or not.
Right. And now, Sanjay, on yours, have you had success with the full spectrums with kind of like the 8 can, or the ones that maybe were having a little bit of problems? Mike has?
I should say no, because I don't know whether I'm leaning towards saying it's not the lighting, it's something else.
Right.
I'm not convinced it's the lighting.
Right.
Because I've put them under full spectrum lighting. I have them under LEDs, and I've had them in my big reef.
Right.
The big reef, when they started to die, I blamed the fact that I have so much water flow. I said maybe they don't like the water flow.
Right.
My tanks upstairs, which are running with LEDs, it's not the water flow. The water flow is not that strong.
Right.
So there's something else that they don't seem to like.
Right.
That we are not providing them. or they're just not adjusting well to captive environments.
Right.
Yeah, they do well for 2 or 3 months, and then you just start to see this gradual fade away. I mean, it's very upsetting because you're feeding them. They're very expensive, and the other stuff like the Acanthophilias are doing great, and the stuff that should be doing just as well, is not.
Right. So again,
I think the stuff with the big mouths tends to do better than the ones with the smaller mouths. This is again my observation.
Sure.
The chalices seem to do okay, especially the ones that people are propagating. And not by propagating, I don't mean chopping them as soon as they land.
No, the ones they've had for years
that they've had captive and it's been captive for a while.
Right.
Those seem to do okay. So obviously there's something that's going on with these things.
But it's a lot of that is the same with the Acroporas. I mean, over time, some of the ones that we've propagated have done better than some of the wild caught ones. I mean, after they've been here 2 or 3 generations, those are the ones long term that everybody has success with, versus still some of the wild stuff that comes in. Because next we're going to start to see corals from Philippines coming in, because now they have a mariculture facility. It's going to be interesting to see how those do compared with the stuff we've been getting.
Right. Okay, so if you're new into the hobby-ish, or you're thinking about the LEDs, okay, we're saying that the corals to stay away from would be acanthastras, what other kind?
Again, get the ones that are quote propagated, not chopped up and glued to a rock and being sold as propagated. Right. The ones which are really being propagated, where their mother colonies exist and people are growing them out and propagating them, I think those have a good chance of being successful.
Good deal.
Because there's also trauma every time they cut them. So if they're just cutting them and shipping them, you're having a double-edged sword. Is they're stressed from that, and they're stressed from being acclimated, and we don't know what we're missing anyhow. So if they've been here for a while, as with everything, they're much more likely to have long-term success with them.
So again, Mike?
So now we have the tank at 7 months. Another 5 months, we'll show it at a year. The next thing is to play with the lighting a little bit more. Try to get more of a full spectrum. Now we have the skimmer on. We'll see what effect that is. I mean, I like to do one thing at a time. So after a month, maybe change the lights off in another month. See what difference that makes. And basically add a couple more fish. Like I said, I'm not adding a lot more. It's pretty packed. But one of the things I did forget to show was this acclimation box. This is what I put the fish in. Mounts on the side. There's holes on the side. You can run a little pump in to have water flow through it. And by doing so, you let the other fish get used to one another. Otherwise, it's like put a new kid in school, they get the crap beat out of them. And I used to have a fairly high mortality rate. Now by doing this, I've been able to cut the mortality rate a lot. I mean, most of us, unfortunately, don't have a quarantine tank because I'm not adding enough fish to make that worthwhile. But when you're starting off a tank, it probably is worthwhile to set up a quarantine tank. So now I more or less observe them for a day outside of the tank, then put them in here, let them get used to their tank mates, get used to eating, get used to all the conditions. Because one of the other things that people don't take into account is most of the fish we get are roughly 12 hours away. So their day is our night is their day. You put them in here, they're somewhat shocked by that. So I put a couple pieces of rock in here or a piece of PVC pipe so they can hide until they get used to it. Because that's one of the other things. A lot of fish won't eat at night that are out during the day. So if they're not eating while they're in here, it may not be that they don't want to eat. It may be that they're not used to that cycle. So until they get used to the day-night cycles reversing, they won't eat. So it may take you 3, 4, 5 days, but they're safe in here. The other fish don't bother them. And for the most part, it's a lot easier because this actually moves up this far, so it's a relatively big container for them to sit in, and the water flows through here because of the holes, so they're not going to be in stagnant water and die because the water's bad. And that's one of the things you have to worry about. When I used to use old big plastic boxes, I used to drill holes in them and stuff, but this is a lot easier. The suction cups stick on here real nice, so it's a nice way to acclimate your fish to the tank so that you don't lose a very expensive wrasse or goby or something else in the tank. Although I didn't acclimate him per se, because I was scared to death he'd die in under the boxes. Right. He's a very active fish, but that just gives you some other idea of things that you could do to help your survivability of the fish when you add them to this tank.
So again, thanks for the time, Mike. Again, we'll come back. We'll change out either lights or skimmer. We'll find out from there.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.